Welcome to the Karen Kenney Show. This is the place where we take a no bullshit look at life's little lessons. Here, together, we find the spiritual glory in even the most wicked hard story. This is a journey from fear back to love and how we can find our greatest strength and happiness in some of the most unlikely places. I believe that if you're willing to change your mind, you can totally change your life. So, are you ready to rewrite your story and choose to live free? Let's do this. Hey, you guys, welcome to the Karen Kenney Show. I'm so happy to be here with you today. And today's episode is called Show Up and Show Out. Show up and show out. And in order to kind of break down what I mean by that, it's just not what I mean. It's like that's kind of like lingo or a vernacular. I'm going to tell you a little story. You know me, I love to tell a good story to kind of make a wicked important point about what it means to show up and show out. So let me put it this way, to not just show up, but to also show out. So if you pay attention at all, meaning if you listen to this show, if you watch it on YouTube or whatever, if you've been opening my emails, if you're on my email list and you get communication from me, then no doubt over the past, month or so, you have heard me mention the name Andre Norman. So I'll just hold up his book here so you can see it. It's my new friend, Andre Norman, the ambassador of hope. And Andre has such an incredible story. But let me tell you a little story about, in case you missed the earlier episodes, I'll make it quick, but a succinct little story of how Andre kind of came into my life. So, and because the lesson that I'm talking about today, show up and show out, actually is inspired by Andre. So it's wicked important for me to always give credit where it is due. So I was watching an event. It was a virtual event on virtual events by this couple named Barry and Blue. And so Barry and Blue are like the eminent leaders in the online training space. And in the live training production. So think about huge events, like huge events like Tony Robbins, Brendan Burchard, Stu McLaren, like just big names in entrepreneurial, in the entrepreneurial field who put on live in-person events. Barry and Blue are often the ones who kind of run production for that. But when COVID hit and everybody started shifting to online, they also shifted into doing online virtual events for really big names and stuff like that. But they also did their own online virtual event. And it was called the Virtual Event on Virtual Events. So I sign up for this sucker just because I am a lifelong learner, a lifelong student. If you heard my podcast on, my bandwidth, what's your bandwidth? I was talking about how sometimes my own curiosity takes me out of the knees. Because I want to learn so many things and I want to understand so many things that I'm curious about. So I followed my curiosity, and I had heard of Barry and Blue from several other people that I know. And I was like, oh, I want to go, see what they're up to. So I signed up for their event. I watched it. It was incredible. And a couple of my podcast guests came from watching that event, and Andre was one of the guest speakers, and he had such a powerful story. And I am such a sucker for a good comeback kid story, right? Especially a kid from Boston. So I was like, okay, here is I got my Townies. If you're not watching the show right now, I got like my Townies hoodie on right now, and Boston kids in the house, Lawrence kids in the house. So, I heard Andre speak at that event, and it was only like 12 to 15 minutes. It was wicked short, but it was so impactful that before he even finished talking, I was like, I got to reach out to this guy. Now, in my head, I also understand if he's talking at this, I'm just going to break it down for you, right? A little behind the scenes of how things work in my mind, a little personal sneak peek here. I'm thinking to myself, this is kind of how it goes, right? I'm like, oh my God, I got to talk to this person. They're wicked cool, or I love what they're talking about, or that story is incredible, or whatever it is. I just trust spiritual team is on the job. So when I get that hit to like follow the call of my heart, I do. It doesn't matter if it sounds crazy, right? Because there's another part of your brain. You can call it the critical mind, the critic, the one who tries to keep you safe, the one who tries to protect you from making an ass out of yourself or a fool out of yourself or whatever it is. And sometimes that voice is mean. Sometimes it's just hesitant or whatever it is. So it's also like, okay, if this guy was just on this big event, why the fuck? Like, you know, he probably costs a lot of money to talk to people. Like, he's probably wicked busy, right? These are all things I could have been saying to myself. But that's not what happened. Like as soon as I heard him speak, I'm like, oh, fellow Boston kid, I'm reaching out. So I immediately, while he was still talking on the show, on the event, I'm already Googling him. I am already finding him digitally. I'm like, okay, I found his website. I'm like, is he on Instagram? I go to Instagram, whatever, find out his email address. And I send him a message in DMs on Instagram, a direct message, private message. And I say, hey, Andre, you're actually talking right now. I'm still listening to you right now. And I am so like, whatever I said to him, I don't even know. I just follow my enthusiasm, right? So, and I just write him this note and I say, I would love to connect with you. I would love to talk to you, whatever. And I'm thinking about my membership, right? So I'm thinking about my spiritual membership, The Nest. Hold on 1 second. So I'm thinking about my spiritual membership, The Nest. And I'm thinking, I would love for him to come and talk to my community. And then I'm like, man, as a guest teacher, like that's all about like him helping me in a way, right? I'm like, how can I help him? Because I'm smart enough to know that if you're going to reach out to somebody who you don't know that well, you had better lead with like, how could this be helpful to him too? And I'm like, well, what's another way that I can share this guy? Because that's really the thing too. Like, if I love doing shout outs for people. I love letting people know when other people are doing good works, right? So I'm thinking to myself, oh, the podcast, that's a great approach, because that way, not only does it help him, because I know he has a book, right? We could talk about the book. We could talk about a story. We could talk about whatever he's got going on, but I'll also be able to reach more people than just the, the people that are in my membership. So I send this, I write this little thing, and I'm like, fingers crossed, we'll see what happens. Okay. So I showed up, right? I showed up for the event, and then I showed up and was like, I listened, I paid attention, and then I immediately wrote to him and took action. So lo and behold, he reaches back out to me like fairly quickly. And he's like, hey, yeah, like, what's your number? And I'm like, what? Whatever. So he ends up calling me on the phone. And I'm like, this is so fun, right? And again, I'm not sitting there. Well, wait, I'll save that part till later in the story. So he reaches out to me, he calls me, and we set up a time where he's going to like come on to the podcast. All right. So the day comes, we set up the thing, we get on the podcast, we start talking. Now, if you have not listened to that episode, you guys, it behooves you. I'm just going to tell you right now, go listen to it. It's from the prison yard to Harvard yard with Andre Norman. It's like, I want to say it's episode 108. It's a couple of episodes ago. It's so great. But what happened is, while we were on that episode, he starts asking me about my community, about my membership. And here's what I'm going to say about Andre Norman. He is one of the most generous people with his time, with his wisdom. I was just like, what is happening right now? So on that episode, while we're talking about my community, for whatever reason, he could see how much it mattered to me, meaning like how much I love my community, how much serving people mattered to me, how much I want to make a difference in the world, how I see so many people suffering. And I believe that the spiritual tools that people get in the nest to help them with their ongoing problem of being fucking human. I'm like, so while we're on that podcast interview, so not only has this guy said yes, right? He answers my DM right away. He sets up a time, he pops on the phone with me. Then he comes on the podcast, and then on the podcast, he's like, here's what I'm going to do. He totally surprises me. If you haven't listened to that episode, I start crying right in the middle of the episode. He's like, I'm going to come into the nest. I'm going to teach your people. We're going to have a good time. Like, da-da-da-da-da-da. And I'm like, holy shit. This guy really knows how to show up. Like he really knows how to show up. And for me, a total stranger, right? The thing we have in common is that we're Boston kids, but then the more that we talk, it's like, yeah, we both kind of grew up, he grew up poor, grew up definitely like, kind of like poor and had these, lot of similarities, right? A lot of similarities. So the time comes when this is the other night. So the other night, it's finally the opportunity where Andre is going to be speaking in the nest. So it's going to be a Zoom call. I got like, I don't know, more than half. So like 60% of the members of the nest, like 40 people, whatever it was, 38 people or whatever, is going to be on the call. I'm so excited. And it's the night before, right? It's the night before. And I hear from Andre. He text messages me and he asked me this one question. He says, "Where do you live?" And I'm like, and I tell him, I'm like, I'm in New Hampshire. How far are you from Boston? How far? What's the closest airport? And I'm like, what is happening right now? Okay, so that's a little teaser. That's a little teaser of what happens. But here's the thing. So now I'm gonna leave you there. And I'm going to fast forward to the night of the call, and you'll see why in a second. Stay with me. So it's the night of the call. I'm sitting up in my office. Now, if you watch this show instead of listen to this show, you can see that my background looks different right now because I totally flipped my room around. Because I brought my bunny Binky. For those of you who don't know, I have a bunny. She is a lionhead rabbit. Her name is Binky Buttons. And Binky is the queen of Binklandia. So the queen of Binklandia really loves this room. And this used to be her room from the time she was a baby when I first got her and rescued her till probably about a year ago. And then about a year ago, I moved her room downstairs. She still had her own room, but it was downstairs. And long story short, I just moved her back upstairs. So this room looks like totally different, right? So the setup is different. So the night of there's a reason why I'm telling you this. Okay. So first of all, if you're just watching it, you're like, hey, I'm still in the same room. It just looks different because I flipped the whole room around. But so the camera angle that people see when they listen to this show is they see a little bit of a different angle. So the night of the call, with Andre, I have my whole desktop, my whole like thing just kind of shifted a little bit. So it's a little off center. And unless you were really paying attention, you wouldn't have noticed it, right? So I start to talk to them and I'm like, hey, you guys, I'm so glad you're all here. We did a centering, like we're going to do a centering, like all this stuff. And we get ready for the call. And then I just kind of say like, okay, Andre should be here any second. But who here has read his book? I know I've sent it to a few of you who's actually read the book. They raise their hands. I'm like, who's listened to the podcast episode with him? Because they're just Jones. Like everybody's so excited to learn from Andre because I had been telling them about him. They listened to the podcast. They like feel so honored that he's going to take the time to talk to them on a Zoom call, right? And so I'm like, all right, you guys. So who here has, listened to the podcast? They all raise their hands. I'm like, oh, so you guys know who he is. I go, but here's the other thing you don't know. I said, Andre lives down in Atlanta, Georgia. I go, so we're in the same time zone because I'm kind of like building it up, right? I'm like, he's going to be here any second. I said, but not only do we live in the same time zone, I said, right now we're in the same room. And I twist my desktop in the camera and all of a sudden Andre steps into the shot and he's like in the same fucking room as me. And they start losing their minds. Like everybody's clapping and like, woo, like what is happening right now? And this gets to the part of the second half of the title of today's show, which is show out. You don't just show up, you show out. Now, if you've never heard that term before or that phrase, what it really means to show out is to really be visible or to like to attend a place and make an impression, to leave a mark on the people there, to like be remarkable. And I cannot tell you what that did, them seeing him step into my camera frame for us to sit down side by side. They were just like, what is happening? And if you've ever heard like people will talk a lot of time, regardless of how you feel about the Patriots and Tom Brady, but people will often say Tom Brady doesn't just show up, he shows out. And if you know who Tom Brady is, and if you follow his athletic career and how he is on the field, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So what Andre did, he didn't just teach us. He didn't come in the room and wag his finger at us and say, hey, you need to show up and show out. He embodied it. He was it. He was the living example of it. This guy, yes. I mean, this is the thing. When he texted me, now we're going to circle back. When he texted me and he said, where do you live? And I told him, what's the closest airport? I thought, I didn't even know. We're talking the night before the Zoom call. I did not know he was going to be in Boston. So he calls me and he's like, I'm going to be here. He's like, why do this call from on Zoom, from a hotel room when I can just drive to your house and we can be in the room together? And I was like, what? Like, I got so excited, and you guys know me. I started talking like really fast, and he's like so chill. And he's like, hey, take a deep breath. Take a deep breath. And I was like, what are you talking about? Right? So he and his buddy Dominic, they're going to be touring. They're going to be here to do work, to tour like 4 different Massachusetts state prisons, because he wants to bring his program into the prisons. And these were prisons that he had been in himself. It's so powerful, you guys. It's so powerful, the way that he wants to come back and help the others who are in a similar position that he was in, who find themselves in jail, who are incarcerated. And he wants to help them it's so, I can't even, I get so like worked up because I get so inspired and so enthusiastic and just so proud, right? Proud of my new friend, and honored that this person who had never met me before, totally taking a shot on me, not only saying yes to be on my podcast, then invites himself to be like, I'm going to come into the nest and teach your people. Then invites himself to my house, because I would never ask him to do that. I would never ask a person, even if I knew he was going to be in Boston, I wouldn't say, hey, would you drive to my house? And I'm not going to put somebody out who's already doing me a favor. But the fact that he volunteered, the fact that he showed up and he showed out, because that 2-hour conversation left a mark on people. People were so moved and so blown away. And if you could have heard the things that the members were writing afterwards about, wow, that really made me take a look at how I've been showing up in my business, how I've been showing up for myself, how I've been showing up for my family, how I've been showing up for my own dreams, my own visions, like my fear of asking for things, and and Andre did this really gracious and beautiful thing where he said, he told the story and he said, and he told it from his point of view. I'm on this thing for Barry and Blue, my friends. I do my 12 minutes. I get a DM from this girl, and she's like, fellow Boston kid, whatever. We hop on the phone. He tells the whole story, and he goes, and I said, yes, because, he wants to serve. Of course, he loves to be helpful, but this is a guy who gets paid like $10,000 an hour. This is a guy who's has like multi-millionaire business. Like, he doesn't need to do this for me. You know what I'm saying? Like, he didn't, even if I could have offered him or like a good chunk of change or whatever, he doesn't need my money. That's not why he does it. It's not why he did it. And so it was so powerful. And it really not only affected my members, it affected me. And it really made me and here's another thing about success. When I often talk about money, and I talk about it this way, and I say, it's not about the money. Like, having a lot of money isn't the end goal in and of itself. It's what money makes possible. And a lot of times when you have enough money, like once you're taken care of, right? You got a roof over your head, you got food on the table, your bills can be paid, you got some saving. Like, once you're in a place, and I know people who, and I'm not saying you should wait until then to be generous with your time. I'm just kind of making a particular point here. It's like, there's a freedom that comes from when you are not scrambling and scraping, right? I mean, that's one of the joys that I think money gives is a huge opportunity to be generous, to be incredibly generous, and not just with your dollars, but with your time, because you're not doing this cost-effective way thing, right? Like, oh, well, I could go do this thing for free that really calls to my heart. but I got to make those bills. Like I gotta, make my rent. I got to put that money. I got to feed my kids, like whatever the thing is. So it was just a really powerful thing. And he was saying how, when she asked me to come on the podcast, she didn't show up on the phone call, be like, oh my God, it's him, and like freak out because he's well known, or he's one of the highest paid speakers, or not the high, but like one of the most well-known speakers. He's a Harvard fellow. He's won all these awards. He's like, she knew that if I said yes, that her product, she had the capacity. And it's weird. He's talking about me and now I'm talking about him talking about me, but I'm trying to make a point. He said, she knew that she could hold the space, like she could hang, like she could bring herself up to that level to say, I'm good enough to have him here. And I was just like listening to him like, holy shit, dude. So you guys, here's my whole point in telling you this story. One of the ways that he opened up the call with my people, he said, how many of you don't have what you want because you just never asked for it? I'm going to say that one more time. How many of you do not have what you want because you simply were too afraid to ask for it? And he went on to say, like, if you ask for it and then you get it, you don't just show up, you show out. And by him coming to my house, by us surprising my people with him being in the room, it was just like, this is how you show out. You show up and then you make an impression. And people were talking about how, like, yeah, in COVID, like where everybody's like wearing yoga pants in their pajamas, like it's still 5 o'clock and they're in the pajamas from the night before, whatever. We were kind of chuckling about it. And I don't care because I'm always that particular point. Like I'm in comfy clothes all the time, jeans or a sweats or like whatever, because that's just how I roll. But and I'm sure many of you do too. But a lot of people were saying like, yeah, like I've just been kind of showing up, like at the bare minimum. But we're talking about showing up in your presence. Like, are you here now? Are you like, fuck, are you present? Showing up just doesn't mean you're physically in the room, because you can be like, lights on, but nobody's home, right? Like you can be in the room, but not, you can physically be in the room, but not spiritually, emotionally, and mentally be in the room. So if you're going to show up, you show up fully, you pay attention, you listen, and then you give your all, you give your best. You don't phone it in, you don't half-ass it, you don't like, and he said, and he did this really powerful exercise. And he went around and he asked a bunch of the members and he said, why did you think that I wouldn't show up here for you tonight? And they're like, well, you did show up. You're here. And he's like, no, why do you think I wouldn't have shown up in person for you? And they were saying things like, it would never have occurred to me that you would do that. And then one person was brave enough to be really honest. And they said, because I wouldn't do that. And he's like, well, you got to. He's like, you got to show up for people. He's like, this is how you make an impression. Like, this is what you got to do. You got to show up and serve your community. You got to not just show up, you got to show out. And you could just see, I could just watch, like, cause I always keep my view on gallery view. And it was like this sea of faces and people being like, whoa, like you could really just see, like everybody was like checking themselves. How have I been showing up? And we were talking about, and I said, look, if this guy can get on a plane and come to Boston and then drive, right? Like drive up to New Hampshire to a person's house who he's never met, to show up in my room, literally sitting right next to me here where I am at the mic every time you guys are on this, like listening to this show or watching this show. It was something else, you guys. It was really powerful. Let me see. Well, it won't matter. I'm going to hold up. Let me see if I can get this picture off my phone and show it to you guys. It should be right here really quick. So, and it was so funny because he was, his buddy Dom was hanging out, like laying on the floor. I have like some cushy meditation mats and stuff like that. And he was like hanging out over there and we were like cracking up laughing. It was so great. Yeah. So I'm going to hold the picture up. You guys can see it. So here's my friend. So here's Andre sitting right here at my desk. Is that so fun? Wait, and here's Dom. Here's Dom hanging out on the floor. So you guys, it was so fun. And it was one of those times, it's one of those stories. It's one of those moments in my life that I'm never going to forget. it left such an impression on me. And the word I like to use is remarkable. And listen to this definition of it. It says, the thing that decides, try that one more time, KK. The thing that decides what gets changed, built, or talked about is this. Is it remarkable? Is it worth making a remark about? This is the essence of an idea spreading. Is it remarkable? And I'm telling you all of this backstory in this story because it is remarkable that in this day and age, when everybody is so fucking busy and everybody's so wrapped up in their own shit and everybody's like, got to take care of theirs and they got to da-da-da-da-da, that this person, out of the generosity of their heart, I mean, this is a person who canceled, like once he got this idea in his head, he canceled 2 business meetings, a massage, like all this stuff that he had scheduled so he could come and serve my community. And it was just like, man, I just wanted to share it with you because I want you to be thinking about for yourself. I'm already thinking about this for myself. I'm not telling you what to do. It's an invitation to ask yourself, have I just been barely showing up? Have I even been showing up? Number one. If I have been showing up, how present have I been? Have I been fully showing up? And where in my life have I been showing up but not showing out? And how could I start showing out? How could I start doing that in my own life? Because that just like rejuvenated my spirit in so many ways. First of all, it was so fun. We had such a blast. I feel like it deepened our connection and our friendship. And it made me, we're like he and I are like around the same age. We're from the same place. So we get each other. And we just got along so great. We had so much fun on the call. And so it was like, oh yeah. And then he told my people, I'll be back. Which tells me that he understood that this was not a waste of his time and that he could be impactful and that they appreciated it. And they were really generous back. And not that he needs to hear it. I mean, Dre is Dre. He knows exactly who he is and what he's capable of. But they really showered him back with some love because they really felt it. Because people know, right? Like we know the people in our lives. And that's the whole thing too. Like I try to show up. And whenever I'm on stage, whenever I'm a guest on somebody's podcast, if you bring me into your group, like, I love to guest teach and mastermind. So if you're listening to this, if you're somebody who leads entrepreneurial groups of any kind, or like you lead any kind of a group where you like love to have a guest teacher come in, I love guest teaching in people's groups and masterminds and retreats. And when I speak on stages and when I do these things, being a guest on people's podcasts, it just like lights me up. So I'm very comfortable saying like, hey, I show up and show out. I will always give it my best. And I have some areas in my own life, right? Like where right now I am really stepping up, where I'm showing up for my book. And I'm starting to show out. Like I'm really going the extra mile to try and get this thing done. And I feel like, of course, the Nest members were wicked excited to have the experience. But I also feel like, my spiritual team was giving me a shot in the arm too, right? Like, hey, here you go. Here's a living, breathing example. And it was so fascinating because I was talking, I was telling Andre how, the membership is a spiritual membership. And he was sharing this really powerful story. You guys, I'm telling you, get this book, Ambassador of Hope. He actually just updated it. So there's a new chapter coming out in the new version. So maybe like wait a week or whatever. But by the time you hear this, check it out of getting this book, Andre Norman, Ambassador of Hope. That book, there's no way you can read that book and not be inspired. I do not say that lightly. I was just like, holy Jesus, right? But so I feel like, my spiritual team gave me that opportunity in that interaction too, for a reason. And where was I going with that? Oh, shoot. Hold on. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly. I can't go back and rewind and be like, what the hell was I talking about? But there's a scene in the book where he's talking about how God spoke to him in prison in the situation that he was in and how that changed his life. And it was just so powerful. So, You guys, I hope this landed for you somehow. I hope that, hearing the story of how we met, the progression of his dedication to doing the kind of work that he did, and for his absolute just generosity and kindness, showing up for me and showing up for my people. And just the way I know what I was going to tell you. Thank you, spiritual team. Amen. Hallelujah. Double amen hands. It just came back into my thick skull, my thick Irish skull. So I was telling Andre, we were talking about stuff, and I said, hey, do you know who St. Francis of Assisi is? Do you know who St. Francis is? And we started talking, and I said to him, I have been meditating and praying on the prayer of St. Francis for like the past 20 years, right? And if you may or may not know this prayer, but it's basically like, I'm not going to say the whole thing, but it's like, Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace, right? Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. All right, maybe I will say the whole thing. And then it goes on to say, O divine master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive. It is in pardoning that we are pardoned. And it is dying to self that we are born to the eternal life, right? So I've been contemplating this prayer, and because we become what we think upon. We become what we think, the Buddha says. So when we meditate upon that kind of a prayer, like a passage, those words become part of you when you do it long enough. And what I was trying to say to him is that whole second half of the prayer, and why I love this prayer so much, and why it is a guiding light. You can't really see it back there because of the glare, but it's all printed out like right there. I look at it every day too, is that it's not so much about what am I getting? It's about what am I giving? It's not so much about what have I been given. It's about what am I giving? And Andre is such a walking example of that. Now, I can't speak to his whole character, like his whole life, meaning, right? Like, but I'm just saying in that moment, I can speak to that he was embodying the essence of that prayer. And it was a powerful thing to behold. So you guys, take a look at your life. Take a look at the things and the people, the businesses, the projects, whatever it is that's important to you. Ask yourself, am I showing up and am I showing out? And if I'm not, why not? If I'm not and I'm fine with that, okay. But if I'm not and I wish I could do better, what am I going to do about it next? What do I need to do to actually start to not just showing up, but also showing out and making an impression? Right? To be visible, to be in the room, and to make an impression, because that's how you actually end up staying in the room. P.S. with business deals, right? You become remarkable. That's how you stay in the room. It's one of the ways. So I hope this has been helpful, you guys. I love you and appreciate you so much. Thank you for listening to the show. I don't know, man. If you want to learn from people like Andre too, I'm telling you, the Nest is the place. We have such incredible guest teachers. In the meantime, the doors, we just finished the closing of the Nest. We only open the doors a couple of times a year, but you can right now get on the waiting list if you want to make sure you find out, because you don't want to miss it. If he comes back, you do not want to miss it the next time. So it's just Karen Kenney, KENNEY.com/nest. And you can also just get on my email list, so you'll find out when these amazing people are on my podcast. And that's just really easy too. It's just KarenKenney.com/sign up. So you guys, I love you. I appreciate you. I hope you have an amazing rest of your day. Wherever you go, may you leave the people, the place, the animals, the environment, the earth, happy Earth Day, better than how you found it. Wherever you go, may you be a blessing. Bye. Hey, you guys, thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Karen Kenney Show. I super duper appreciate your time, friendship, and support. And look, if something that I shared from my heart today somehow landed in yours, I'd love to hear about it. So please tag me on Facebook or Instagram or IG stories or wherever the cool kids are hanging out these days. and let me know what your favorite part was or what you found most helpful. You can find me over at Karen Kenney Live. That's Karen, KenneYlive. And if you're digging what I'm saying and you want to hear more, I'd be wicked grateful if you could go to iTunes and subscribe and leave a review, because you guys, that's how you'll help me to keep spreading the love. And if you can think of someone that could benefit from hearing this episode, please share it with them. I'd also love to stay connected with you. So if the feeling is mutual, please go to KarenKenney.com/freebie and download my free guide to building your spiritual team. Until next time, my brothers and sisters, keep living in the fearless flow. Know that I see you, I appreciate you, and I love you. And wherever you go, may you be a blessing.